أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية لأعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Amma ba'd, sisters and brothers in Iman, Salamun Alaikum. We are, Alhamdulillah, into the fifth day of the month of Ramadan. The discussion that we have selected for the 2 weeks that I'm here, the first 2 weeks of the month of Ramadan, is the story from Surah Al-Kahf. Not the entire surah, but only the story of the meeting of Prophet Musa alayhi salam with Hazrat Khizr. And we have looked at it, the point of meeting, and last night we looked at the conversation between Musa alayhi salam asking for permission to be with Khizr, to benefit from his special knowledge that Allah has given to him, and how, the student is requesting to be the company of the teacher, and the teacher was initially hesitating. And so after a little bit of conversation, finally Khizr allowed Musa alayhi salam to be with him, but the condition was that you will maintain sabr. Sabr not in the sense that, Musa alayhi salam didn't have sabr. Sabr in a sense that he, being a Nabi who brought a very elaborate Sharia, when he looks something which looks like violation of the laws, he is not able to contain himself. He speaks out. That was the element of sabr. Otherwise, it's not that, Musa alayhi salam as a Nabi lacked the quality of sabr, which is actually the foundation of akhlaq from the Islamic point of view. So after that agreement between the teacher and the student, then their journey or their being together starts. This is ayat number 71 of Surah Al-Kahf. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. فَانْطَلَقَ حَتَّى إِذَا رَكِبَ فِي السَّفِينَةِ خَرَقَهَا. They both of them. فَانْطَلَقَ is a dual tense here, which means referring to Musa alayhi salam and Hazrat Khizr. That both of them, started their journeys until they reached to the Rakiba fi Safina. They embarked the boat, Kharaqaha, and Khizr made a hole into it. And this is basically the first event in their journey together. So it's interesting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the beginning talked about Musa alayhi salam and the fata, the young man, or his assistant who was with him, Yusha bin Nun. So according to some of the narrations, they were all three together, even in the continuation of the journey. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now focuses only on two of them, Musa alayhi salam and Khizr. So he uses the dual pronoun and not the plural one. They went until they reached to a river, and they had to cross over. They saw a boatman with his boat, and this was his livelihood, that they would, ferry or transport people from one end of the river to the other end. And so they embarked the boat, and this is where we see that while the boat is now reaching to the other side of the river, Khizr made a small hole in it. And when this happened, the ayat goes on, قَالَ أَخَرَقْتَهَا لِتُغْرِقَ أَهْلَهَا. Musa is now talking. Have you made a hole in it so as to drown its passengers? Now remember, you're talking about passengers, not one individual. And this is where, so he continues and he says, لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا إِمْرًا. Surely you have done a grievous thing. And so this is where we see the reason for Musa alayhi salam's reaction is that, he being a Nabi who brought a elaborate Sharia, where damaging someone's property was not acceptable. And this is where we see that, he, according to the instinct of being a Nabi who is Sahib Sharia, a Nabi who brought the first most elaborate Sharia in the history of the prophets, he, according to his instinct, without even thinking about it, spoke against it and protested. And he says, have you made a hole in it so as to drown its passengers? Surely you have done a grievous thing. The description imra'an in the meaning of grievous or terrible or severe, something distressful. So you basically have done something which was going to put everybody into danger in a way. Now this concept and why Musa alayhi salam reacted, before we continue, let me digress slightly, and this is what I will be doing in this story, and I've done till the last 4 days, so I hope you can have sabr, unlike the sabr of Musa alayhi salam here. This whole issue of not damaging the property of other people this is an important issue. Even in the Islamic Sharia, one of the hurmat of mal al-ghayr, the sanctity of the property of someone else, is very important. It is sacred. We have a statement where we say anyone who says, for example, the kalima, 3 things become sacrosanct. Number 1, his life, his honor, nafsuhu wa irzuhu wa maluhu. His life, his honor, and his property. You're not allowed to violate that, and they have their own hurmat. And this is also there in the Sharia of Musa alayhi salam. Actually, in the Islamic Sharia, there is a qaida in fiqh. Mujtahideen use that quite a lot in deriving certain rules and regulations in the fatwa. Based on this qaida, the principle which is known as la darar wa la dirar fil Islam. There is no harming or hurting. So if there is an issue, even if there is no clarity about the issue, if there is darar and dirar, it is forbidden. So there are certain rules which basically, these are the guiding principles that a mujtahid uses to derive some of the Sharia laws. And this qaida, known as la darar wa la dirar fil Islam, is not invention of the mujtahideen. It comes actually from the statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself. From a very famous story, and that's what I wanted to share with you. And this is in our books also, and even in Sunni narrations, there might be some slight difference in the details of how things happen. Even in Usul Kafi, in volume 5, this narration has come twice, which one is a more brief description, the other is more longer description. And I'm going with a longer version of it, where there was a person by the name of Samura bin Jundab. And he actually owned a palm tree in a land which was bought by somebody else from Ansar, one of the citizens of Medina. And so now you have a person who has bought the land, but the tree belongs to somebody else. And this was part of his, let us say, his backyard. And those, even now, the houses have their boundary, to maintain modesty, privacy of the family. And so this fellow, Samra or Sumra, the way he was called, Samra bin Jundab, used to go whenever he wants to get the khurma, the dates from his palm tree. He would just, open the door and go in. And so this Ansari, who was the owner of the house, he told him that, you first of all come unannounced, put us in a kind of compromising situation and we don't like it. Why don't you announce or knock and take permission before you come in? So, we can maintain our own privacy. My family is here, I'm not alone. He says, لا أستأذن في طريق وهو طريقي إلى أدقي. He was one of those, I wouldn't say a lawyer, but I would say somebody, adamant about my right and my legal right. He said, that's my tree. This is the only way from your door going into your property to the tree. So I have this right of passage here, according to the Sharia and according to the law. So this is my property. I can go. I don't need your permission. So the owner of that house is now being polite, asking him that, we are not stopping you from going to your tree and taking your khurma, but at least, have this decency, to knock on the door and ask before you come in. And so now this Ansari went to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and complained about Samurah bin Jundub. He says, this is what he's doing. He's putting us in inconvenience for me and my family. And so the Prophet called him. And the Prophet said, this is the complaint I have about you. فَاسْتَأْذِنَ عَلَيْهِ إِذَا أَرَدْتَ أَن تَدْخُلْ. The Prophet asked him very simply that, seek permission before you enter their home. What would you do if Rasulullah asked you that? Or what is expected from a Muslim if Rasulullah is telling you that, when you want to go to your property, your tree there, you have this, way of the passage, the right there. But the Prophet is saying, seek permission before you go in. But he's again, one of those is my right. And so he says, Ya Rasulullah, أستأذن في طريقي إلى عبقي? You want me to ask permission to reach to my own property? So now he's arguing with Rasulullah. And this is where Rasulullah says, okay, if this is what you're so much into it, Rasulullah then makes a deal with him. He says, leave that tree. وَلَكَ مَكَانُهُ عَبْقٌ فِي مَكَانٍ كَذَا وَكَذَا. I'll give you another tree somewhere else in place of that. He says, no, it's still adamant, this is my property. I don't want. And the Prophet says, وَلَكَ اثْنَانِ. I'll give you 2 trees somewhere else instead of this one. He says, لَا أُرِيد. I don't want. And the Prophet is making his deal more sweeter and sweeter until it reaches to 10. So he says, leave this one and I'll give you 10 trees somewhere else. He says, La. Then Rasulullah says, I'll give you 10 trees in a better location than what I proposed first. Still he says, no. Then Rasulullah makes the best of the deal possible. He says, leave this one. وَلَكَ مَكَانُهُ أَدْقٌ فِي الْجَنَّةِ. Leave this tree to this family. And I guarantee you will have a palm tree in Jannah. Still this person, stubborn about his right, legal right. He says, La urid. I don't want. This is my tree, I want it. And I'll go, I don't need to ask permission. Now this is where you see the conflict, between the right of one person and the right of the other person. And if you are not able to reconcile there in a better way, then what happens? Then you see, Islam, you will use that principle. La darar wa la dirar fil Islam. You are basically, by exercising your right, you are hurting and harming the rights of others. And when there is collision between the two, one has to give in. And this is where the Prophet says, إِنَّكَ رَجُلٌ مُضَارٌ. You are a person who is basically, harming others and hurting others. وَلَا ضَرَرَ وَلَا ضِرَارَ فِي الإسلام. And Islam doesn't accept this. And so then he ordered the owner of the house, he says, go there, uproot his tree and throw it outside. And then he says to Samra bin Jundub, go, take your tree and plant wherever you want. And this is where we see that, this issue of la darar wa la dirar, you cannot really, harm somebody's property in any way. This was not an issue of, it was not damaging their house, but violating their right. And this is where we see that, that is an issue which is there in Islam, and as well as the Sharia that Prophet Musa alayhi salam brought. And so for him, he being a passenger, Hazrat Khizr being a passenger, and probably Yusha bin Nun was with them, they only had, yes, they bought the ticket or paid the owner of the boat, but the right was only to be a passenger from point A to point B. You don't have a right to do any damage on it. Some of our ulama actually are very careful about these issues. Rental deals that we sign with the rental cars, do we read them carefully? How many people are allowed to drive? Even insurance laws comes into it. If somebody else from your family was driving, where his name is not in the list. There was one alim, I don't remember the name, would hire a donkey or a horse to travel from one city to another, not that very far away. And he said, I want it for myself. Just while he was leaving, somebody else brought a parcel. He said, since you're going there, can you take this for me? And this person said, I only took this animal, hired it for myself. This is extra baggage. And so, of course, maybe he could have done a deal that I'll pay him a little bit more, but he decided not to use it. And so sometimes what I want to say is that we have to be careful about, just a lesson that we can derive. And Musa alayhi salam basically was looking at it from the purely legal, shari'i or zahiri perspective. And therefore he immediately, according to his instinct, reacted and protested that, what are you doing? This is not the right thing to do. And that's where Hazrat Khizr, according to the next ayat, he says, قَالَ أَلَمْ أَقُلْ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِي صَبْرًا. Musa, didn't I not say that you will never be able to bear with me patiently? Because the issue is that Musa was looking at things from purely legal perspective, whereas, Khizr was doing this based on an inner dimension that Musa was unaware of. And the explanation comes at the end of these three events in the story, so we'll leave it for that. Now, when Khizr says, I told you will not be able to bear with me, because I know certain things that you don't know. And I make the decisions and take the action according to my knowledge, and you are not aware of it, and therefore you will look at it from a different angle, and you will protest, and you will not be able to maintain, your calm. And this is where Musa alayhi salam now kind of apologizes, and he says, لا تؤاخذني بما نسيت. Forgive me for what or do not hold me accountable. Do not, in a way, punish me for what I forgot. Here again, forgot is not forgetfulness. And Nabi doesn't have nisyan. It is more bima taraktu. In a sense, I promise to you that I will be, quiet. I will obey you, not say anything. But my instinct of following the Sharia didn't allow me. It overtook me, and so وَلَا تُرْهِقْنِي عَنْ عَمْرِي عُسْرًا, and do not make me undergo a difficult task, because ignoring open violation of the Sharia was a difficult task for Musa alayhi salam. It's only when he is told later on at the end of this whole passage, when we'll come to the end of the story, where Khizr explains why I did this and what was the reason behind it. And so inshallah we'll continue with the next story, and again, as I said, explanation comes at the end of the story, so you'll have to wait for it. Salawat. Well, we have about 10 minutes or so. I just wanted to revisit some of the basic rulings about traveling in the month of Ramadan. So let us see how much you remember from the questions in the quiz that we have done in the last few years. So we'll start with the first one. Ahmad starts his journey after Zuhr time. His fast of that day. Are you sure about it? Anyone says invalid? Valid, okay. Why? You can travel after Zuhr. That wouldn't be a problem. Okay, so the answer would be valid. The second one, Hassan travels after Zuhr. Same as the first one. Goes from Toronto to Ottawa. Have the iftar with his friends there. Spends the night also in suhoor with the friends, and then returns home next day before Zuhr time. His fasting of both days, the day he left and the next day when he came back, both would be valid? Because the first one he left after Zuhr and he came back next day before Zuhr. Okay. It is valid. Yes. Now we come to the third one. Sakina travels before Zuhr. So her fast becomes void. What are the implications? What does she has to do? Only do qadha, or qadha and pay fidya, or only do qadha and also pay kafara? Huh? It's only qadha. There is no fidya there, no kafara there. You see, kafara is only there when there is violation of fasting without a kind of a valid reason, or violation of the 9-10 things which are known as muftirat, eating and drinking or smoking and things like that. If somebody does that, then they have to do qadha as well as pay kafara. Kafara is a fine. Whereas what is fidya? Fidya is not kafara. Kafara is a compensation. For example, if there is an old person who can fast but with difficulty, then they are exempted. But they pay fidya there. Of course, if they cannot fast at all, then they are exempted totally. And so there is a big difference between fidya and kafara. Fidya is per day 750 grams of ration, rice or flour. And kafara is actually 60 times multiplied that per day. So there is a big difference there. Okay? There's a technical difficulty here, so we'll just forget A, B, and C. Just look at the question. Suhail travels to Buffalo early in the morning, goes there, has a breakfast, and then he returns back to Toronto before Zohar on the same day. Is his fast valid? But he came before Zohar. He does niyat now. Huh? Huh? No, we are saying early in the morning. It's not valid. Okay. But then what is he yet to do? Only qada or qada and kafara? Only qada. And look at the second one. Hamid travels to Buffalo, same situation, in the morning, and returns to Toronto before Zohar of the same day, while having not eaten or drank anything from Fajr to Zohar time. And he comes back to Toronto. Is his fast for that day valid? It's not valid? It is valid, but he has to do niyat after reaching Toronto. You can't do niyat in the morning because you're traveling. It's just like somebody, let's say, is traveling from overseas and they're not had anything to eat and drink from Fajr, wherever they left from, and they reach Toronto before Zohar. They can do the niyat and their fast would be okay. But do they have this option of eating and drinking while they are traveling? It's not wajib for them to refrain from eating and drinking, like the first case. He's in Buffalo, just maybe 2 hours from Toronto, but still it's not haram for him to eat and drink there if he wants. He just has to do qaza after the month of Ramadan. But if he did not do that, and he comes back to Toronto before Zohar, he will do the niyat and that day's fast would be okay. Any questions on this? We just have about 2 or 3 minutes. Yes.
Somebody wants to travel about 50 kilometers from Toronto to somewhere, 50 kilometers. And there is houses, buildings continuously. And there is no empty area or open area. What we can do in this case if it is possible?
So your question is that what is hadd tarakhus?
Yes.
What is the boundary of the city from where you count the journey, the traveling, how many kilometers you're going? Toronto is one of those cases where we call al-bilad al-kabira. It's not a normal city, it's a mega city. So you don't look at the municipal boundaries as such. Otherwise, just Toronto itself is very small. Brampton by itself is a city. Richmond Hill by itself is a city. Now you look at, what we call Greater Toronto area. And so you look at those boundaries and start from there. In the past, we have sat down and come up with a criteria and this was done about 6-7 years ago. Maybe we might need to revisit because the city has expanded even more, but at least till now the consensus among the ulama locally in Toronto is that Milton in the west, Pickering, Ajax in the east, Newmarket in the north, and of course the Lake Ontario in the south are the boundaries. So you count from there onwards, from the city boundary of that area. Otherwise, if you just look at the issue of houses, you go from here to Hamilton to almost, even further up, you'll still see the houses. And so that would be the Urfi definition of what is Toronto.
You will fast
Well, that person will count the kilometers from that boundary. So if he is living, let's say, after Milton, he should count 22 kilometers. If he crosses that, then he is traveling. If he is within that 22 kilometers after Milton, he is still in the city. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين